Well, good morning, Nirupam.
Morning, Anand.
Yeah, welcome to the Apex Conversations by PGC. Uh, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on this platform. This is essentially for the audience. Nirupam, besides being a great friend for many years, is a very tall business leader. Has worked with various organizations of great repute over the last 30 years, and till recently, the president of Dixon Technologies. uh, and prior to that, worked as a senior VP with Philips Lighting for close to a decade, Nirupam.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, also with General Electric, GE Capital for close to 5 years. And that's where I had the opportunity to work with Nirupam. And before that, for many years with Asian Paints and Whirlpool. So, diverse industries, different kind of roles. Nirupam, you must be feeling extremely proud looking back at the career you've had so far.
Yeah, it's been a nice mix of companies and roles. So I think that's what's made it exciting. Like you said, very diverse industries.
Yeah, awesome, great. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation with you. And like we discussed, this is one topic that has often intrigued me, as someone who's watched business leaders like yourself from the sidelines. Uh, my role as an HR partner with various CEOs. We often talk about leading with purpose, leading with authenticity. These are terms that are often spoken about, and there is so much content out there uh, where people talk that when you have evolved leaders and when you have leaders who are mature and are delivering great results, these are leaders who often actually lead with purpose, and these are leaders who are expected to demonstrate authenticity in their style of leadership, and that's how they need to come across to people. All of that actually sounds very appropriate and perfect, but the big question that often has played on my mind is how relevant and real actually is it in your own experience over the last 20 odd years that you've been leading organizations and teams? How real and authentic actually it is in terms of leading with purpose.
So I think if I look back at the early years of my career, I think this whole aspect of leadership, and I have to say that when I was doing organization behavior in my MBA institute, I
Mm,
actually thought it was bunkum. But then after I started working, I realized how critical it is.
mm,
Talking about company culture, talking about leadership, all of that, I think, is just so critical. And you don't try to realize the importance until you actually start working yourself.
mm,
Uh, and once I started working, I think when you see leaders, and early in your career, you have, because you move across different roles in a short period of time, you see, different managers. And what you end up learning from them is very different.
mm,
I think I've been really lucky in my 30-year career to have had some really great managers across
mm,
organizations. And learning from them, and I think the best leaders have been the ones which have, you use the word authenticity, authentic. I think when I look back at the best leaders or that I've kind of worked under, all of them have been very authentic, have been down to earth, have had humility, and yet obviously able to give a purpose to the entire organization. So not only their one downs, but even people down the line.
mm,
That combination of basically being authentic, and being authentic doesn't mean being perfect, right?
mm,
So each one of us has our own flaws, right? No one is perfect. But knowing what your shortcomings are and working
mm,
on them, I think
mm,
that
mm,
itself is the mark of a great manager and leader. So I think a lot of the people I've worked with and the leaders I worked with have really shown that they knew what their strengths were, they leveraged their strengths for the organization's betterment, but they also realized their shortcomings as leaders and worked on it or took feedback on it and tried to work on it. And I think that's something that hopefully I've learned from over the years. And when I became a leader, then I tried to follow some of those best practices that I'd seen over the years.
great, great. So what you're telling me is actually all of these words, purpose and authenticity, are for real, right? That's what I hear you say. So
Absolutely.
And great segue into the next question for me is that having learned and observed some of these leaders over the last 3 decades, and you worked in Indian companies and you worked in MNCs. So I think I like the diversity of experience that you could be bringing in here. Is have there been opportunities where you have demonstrated some of these yourself, and especially leading with purpose, and how has it actually made a difference for you and your teams that you led as a leader?
Yes, that's and I probably give the example of a role that I had when I was global business leader for consumer lamps in Philips
Mm,
Lighting.
mm,
Uh, so this was between 2014 2019, so about 5 years when I was based out of Hong Kong, leading that global business.
mm,
Challenge in that business was very different from anything that I'd done before. So this was a 1.1 billion euro business, but declining. So this was conventional consumer lamps, and the industry was
mm,
moving towards LED. So we knew that over a period of time, this business would degrow. But having said that, it was a highly profitable business, generated a
mm,
lot of EBITDA, lot of cash for the company.
mm,
So it's critical for us to degrow less than the market and therefore gain market share in a declining market while actually improving profitability.
mm, mm,
That's a real challenge. And when you've got a team, I was based in Hong Kong. My CFO was sitting with me in Hong Kong. I had a team in Shanghai, I had a team in Eindhoven, and I had a team in New Jersey. So the team was literally scattered across the world. Now, you need to keep people motivated because everyone wants to be part of a growing business and a growing company. But having said that, we knew that our business was critical to the future because we had to generate cash that we could then pump into LED growth.
correct.
Uh, so the role that we played was critical. At the same time, the reality was it was degrowing. So
Mm,
coming up with plans to make sure that we still had a powerful portfolio. At the same time, we kept on pruning the portfolio because it didn't make sense having a
mm,
portfolio when the market was declining.
mm,
Uh, Still staying relevant to each market, and the markets are very different in the West versus Asia versus Middle East, etc. So we had to really, really be on top of what the consumer trends were.
mm,
Uh, so a lot of work in keeping people focused on the fact that we continued to be a critical part of the company, and
mm,
our goal was to generate profits.
mm,
All of us worked really hard to improve profitability, so much so that the absolute EBITDA that we generated in 2018, for example, was the
mm,
same that we generated in 2015,
mm.
despite the business having declined year on
Wow.
year.
Mm,
Improved our profitability substantially. So I think, and the pride that you have in a team when there is a clear purpose, when you know what your role is in the overall organization, and how you're delivering and helping the company to kind of improve for the future. I think that was very motivating for the team.
mm,
You know, it sounds great post facto, but in that time, the fact is that you also need to keep reducing the team, right? Because the
mm,
business is declining. So really
mm,
making sure that people then got good landing spots within the organization and other businesses. And
mm,
that
mm,
as a leader as well. So
mm,
to do their job as is, but also making
mm,
sure that they have futures in the company as far as
mm,
possible. Uh,
mm,
that I think really making sure that people understood what their role was in the picture for the business and the
mm,
overall. I
mm,
think that was a really, really powerful example in my mind of having a purpose for the larger team uh,
mm.
and your role within that team. So I think that was probably the best example I can think of.
Oh, that's a great example. And actually, incidentally, when you say declining business, declining portfolio, but at the same time focusing on improving the EBITDA and contribution, keeping in mind that the purpose is to enable the organization to move forward while your own vertical might be declining, in the short term. So it's quite a challenging scenario to keep someone excited. So great example. Some of the You did dwell on some of the methods, like making sure people had the good right landing spots, and you also mentioned that through the journey, while it post facto seems interesting to talk about it, but while in the journey, the challenge is very different, right? So, can you share examples of the kind of challenges one would face when you're driving a purpose-driven, uh, team, or a team driven by a certain purpose for the organization, and the kind of headwinds one is likely to experience, and how one has waded through those headwinds. So, some examples of headwinds.
So I think the critical part in this is making sure that the team is all focused in the same direction. So
Mm,
whether it's R&D or supply chain or marketing or any other function, really making sure that everyone is aligned to the same purpose. And one tool that I found very useful across organizations and across roles is really when you're doing the KRA or KPI setting.
mm,
What I used to do was, sit with each one of, for example, my team members, discuss the KPIs for the next year, and then make sure that all of us sat as a team and went through
mm,
the KPIs of each individual together. Now, the objective there is very clear, to make sure that all of them are congruent, moving in the same direction, and no function feels that their KPIs or someone else's KPIs are counterproductive to what they need to deliver.
got
So
it.
the feeling then of becoming one team really literally becomes, having the same KPIs for everyone, which will then ensure that the overall business objectives are met. I think that's been a
Mm,
very powerful tool in kind of getting people together and moving in the same direction and not finger pointing. And you and I
got
know that a lot of finger pointing which happens between sales and marketing and R&D and supply chain, etc. Just avoiding that by making sure everyone knows that everyone is moving in the same direction. I think that's been one way of doing it. The second is I talked about people also feeling a little uncertain about their future, right? So you need people to deliver for today, but you need to make sure that they're not worried about tomorrow.
it.
So they're really understanding what each one of those individuals really wanted to do in their career, and then making sure that I then reached out to either the business head of the other businesses or the HR heads to make sure that those connections got made.
Mm,
I think I was very happy that pretty much everyone in my leadership team over a period of those 5 years that I was leading the business actually then moved on to good solid roles within the organization. So
mm,
we have to let people go because we found landing spots for them in other growing parts of the business.
right.
So I think again what people see is, does the leader genuinely care about
Mm,
the individual?
mm,
While meeting business objectives, are they also looking out for me? And I think once they have the confidence that yes, my manager or my leader is actually going to take care of my career, not just
right.
expect to deliver today, but make sure that I kind of grow for the future. I think once they get that confidence, then they deliver and they over deliver, and they're proud of what they're doing. I think that
Mm.
has worked really well. So those are, I think, some of the things that have worked for me at least.
Great, great. Thanks for sharing. Actually, two great examples. As much as KRAs and KPIs are seen as routine activities, how could you actually direct them for a certain purpose? I think it's a great example of that. Yeah. See, one of the other thoughts that comes to mind is, some of these terms when we say, oh, who is a leadership who drives with purpose, and the purpose is larger than, life, and it's very ambitious. It takes probably, maybe it might take decades to actually achieve what you have set out. And then organizations and leaders go align values, align strategies of the business to the larger purpose of that organization. How in your mind as a leader does this actually connect to what companies are mostly bothered about is shareholder value, revenue and profitability, quarter on quarter growth. At the end of the day, the share market is not very generous in judging performance of business leaders. And every quarter there is a performance appraisal, or every month there's a performance appraisal in the stock market, right? So how does one connect something which is so amorphous, and ambiguous, to something that is so material and real for the pundits who are predicting the future of organizations?
So I think, as we know, a lot of organizations have missions and visions, etc., right? And there are all kinds of missions and visions. Some of them are up there at 50,000 feet. Some of them are a little more kind of tangible. I think it is important for whether it's a promoter-driven company or it's an MNC, the leaders in that organization to make sure that the overarching purpose over a longer period of time is translated into something tangible. So when you look at some of the best missions and visions, for companies around the world, a lot of them are really simple, easy for someone to understand, whether they're the bottom rung of the company or right at the top. Then it becomes a really common mission and a common vision. So I think making sure that you capture what you want to do over a longer period of time, but making it tangible so that people really get it, and it doesn't seem airy fairy. I think that's critical. Then, of course, that whole process we talked about earlier about KPI setting, I think that is an important process. And how does each individual and each small team and larger team then play into that overall vision of the company? I think that is a critical step. And there are lots of companies which do it well. There are lots of companies who don't do it well at all. I think somewhere, if you don't do that properly, then people don't feel that pride in being part of the overall company vision. I'm doing my bit. I will not do anything extra because no one's really told me what the organization is all about.
Right.
So again, early in career, a lot of people say mission, vision, KPIs, all of this is something which is very fuzzy. The more concrete and tangible that you make it, the better it is, particularly down the line. I think very often your senior leadership teams really know exactly what is happening, and they have these meetings and they discuss the vision and how they're doing. You have a 1-year plan, 3-year plan, 5-year plan, etc. But people down the line, do they understand what that overarching objective is for the next 5 years, 3 years, 1 year? So how tangible can you make it? And I think that's where internal communication becomes extremely critical. And to the top. So is the leader communicating all the time? Is the senior leadership team communicating down the line? Are people getting it? I think doing that pulse check once in a while is kind of critical.
Got it. Great. I think it's a great segue into the next question that was playing on my mind is, going on this topic of authenticity, right? You did emphasize internal communication as one part. But before we go to internal communication, there is so much talk about authentic leadership. What exactly does authentic leadership mean to you, to Nirupam Sahay?
So I think it is basically being consistent in everything that you do as a leader. So whatever you want your team to do and the wider team to do, are you doing the same? So do people see you as walking the talk? Something is motivating a team and saying you need to do X, Y, and Z, but are you also showing that you can do it yourself? So that's extremely important, that you ask your team to do stuff that you would be willing to do, right? You have to have the same standards for yourself as you have for your team. So I think that's really important. The other is, I think, whenever you're communicating, so what you're communicating in public and what you're communicating in smaller groups and what you're communicating to individuals, is that
consistent?
So as a leader, it has to be consistent. You can't say something to the group and then tell the smaller group, no, that's all, that's the public kind of announcements, but actually let's do something else. So authentic are you in terms of communicating exactly what you want everyone to do and being consistent about it? The other is, I think, really being honest with your people. So this whole thing about feedback, appraisals, end-year appraisals, mid-year appraisals, etc. Are you as a leader communicating very clearly to people what they're doing well and what they can do better in a supportive manner, right? And one of the things that you read a lot about is that people are very, very wary of giving negative feedback. And the whole point is that you treat it as a learning and growth opportunity. You're trying to help the person to improve so that they go further in their career, versus trying to point out faults. I mean, you have to think of that as a leader also. Right? The person getting the feedback also has to have that maturity, but as a leader, you need to take the bull by the horns and say, this is what you're doing well, this is what you're not doing well, and this is how you can improve. So leaving it at these are your shortcomings is not good enough. You also need to say, how can you help? And is it
Right.
training? Is it coaching? Is it mentoring? Is it learning from others in the organization? And there's several ways of doing it. But are
Mm.
you communicating that absolutely clearly to them or not? And then, of course, when things go well, communicate. When things don't go well, communicate even more. Right? Very often, what happens is when things are not going well, then suddenly you don't see the leaders. So, really, I think times when the market is tough, uh, or there are headwinds, COVID hits, etc. I mean, these are things that you've not anticipated. But are you communicating clearly what you expect people to do in these tough circumstances?
Mm.
So, it's great to say, we've grown 25%, we've improved profitability, and that's good news. That's always great to give. But when times are tough, you've had a tough quarter, you've degrown 5%, profitability has got hit because of competitive pressure. That's the time you need to communicate and say, this is what we are planning to do to get out of this and improve.
Mm.
So I come back to the communication point, multiple times because I think that's one thing that if I look back at the 30 years, there are times when I felt that the communication from my leaders could have been more, and maybe I could have even done more when I was, leader across different organizations. But the more I think of it, I think that is an important aspect that you keep communicating and people realize you're gassing. Right? So you have to believe what you're saying. Don't say
Right.
it for the sake of it, but really believe what you're saying and then communicate the hell out of it.
Oh, great answer. Actually, this is, and you touched upon so many important points as you talked about authentic leadership. It actually cuts across a multitude of things that a leader needs to do in order to come across as authentic. There's one word which is often confused with authenticity is transparency. You know, the expectation of the leader to be honest all the time, to state all the stuff and lay all the cards on the table, to an extent of being completely open and transparent, right? And we all know in industry there are conflicting expectations amongst a from various stakeholders and also from our own direct reports. How, in your experience, have you balanced some of these in your own style of leadership as you work through, what trying to come across authentic to your teams?
So I think there's a balance between communicating and over communicating as well, right?
Mm.
So if there's something happening in the organization um, that could lead to, for example, degrowth in the future or job losses, etc., you have to figure out what is the right time and the right way of communicating that.
Mm.
So, in this thing about transparency, you shouldn't create panic in the organization.
Right.
So, you do need to communicate that point that I made a few times, but you have to do it in a way which is positive and helping individuals and teams in the organization. So, sometimes you have to deliberately not be over transparent because that's going to be detrimental to the morale or the impact on the organization. So you have to take those conscious decisions of what needs to be communicated when. Uh,
Mm.
when you communicate, like I said, when it's relatively bad news, you need to be very mature about how you communicate and then show a way out of it. If you just communicate that there's a problem, then that just creates panic. If you say there's
Right.
a problem and this is how we can get out of it as a team by
Mm.
focusing on a few things, then I think that's taken positively. When you say, there's an issue and you don't give a solution or a potential solution, that's
Mm.
when that creates a little bit of distrust
Mm.
and uh, panic. And that's not what you want. You want the organization to be focused on delivering short term and long term. So I think transparency is good, but there are times when it's better for the organization when you're not fully transparent, but you're working in the background to make sure that you're working on the right things to improve for the future.
Got it. No, great answer. So there's one, slightly trick question here is that have you, in your own career, and 30 years is a long time. So in your career, uh, have worked, fortunately or unfortunately, with a boss or a leader who has not been authentic? And how have you handled it? And I'm asking this question from two lenses. One is obviously you can't get everything that you want in life,
Mm.
and two, when you are dealing with a difficult or maybe an unauthentic leader, this could be advice to some people as to how to navigate scenarios like that
Sure.
and deal with your own emotions.
Yeah. And in our careers, there will always be great managers and leaders, and there will be, middling managers, and you will have managers who are not so great, right? So that's a reality. You can't always have perfect managers. So if I look back, I think luckily there's probably been only one case where uh, there was a leader who I talked about walking the talk. So really, in terms of what was communicated to individuals and what was communicated upwards, for example, to the MD of the organization, there was disparity. So there's one communication happening to people, and there's another communication happening to the top leaders. So that leads to a bit of dissonance, because then you don't know where you stand.
Mm,
So in terms of communicating clearly, again, in terms of what is going right, what needed to improve, etc., that communication was just not clear. And then some feedback was going to the senior leaders, which was contrary to at least my own experience of
mm,
what I'm doing.
mm,
I think in cases like that, my advice would be, if I look back then, what I did and what I would advise for people to do in that case is, I think you need to kind of confront it upfront. Don't let it fester. So if you've got an issue with your leader or manager, I think it's better to go up and talk about it.
mm,
And this is why I'm feeling uncomfortable. Because I think sometimes it may be that the leader doesn't realize what he or she is doing, right? To give the benefit of the doubt. So it's better to be upfront about what you think is not going so well in that relationship. Try and give that feedback. Hopefully, the leader then works on it. Now, if the leader doesn't work on it, then that's a different issue. Then there's
mm,
always choice. I mean, there's that old chestnut about people leaving bosses and not jobs. Then you kind of try and find another spot within the organization with a different leader, or you leave the organization, right?
mm,
But that should be obviously kind of a last. I think sometimes people just forget that you can have a conversation with your manager,
mm,
and you can also give feedback. Feedback is not
mm,
one, should ideally be two-way. So you give feedback to your leader saying that, this is what I thought was, just not the right way of handling things. Uh, but like I said, luckily it's just been one scattered example across a 30-year career. So I think I've been lucky.
yeah, I can say that you've been really lucky. Yeah. So one other experience I have had as an executive coach, and I work with so many leaders across multiple industries as a coach, is a lot of people have got designated as leaders. They've got the titles. They've called business heads, and they take on big responsibilities. And they're really, really smart people. They're really smart people, and they've worked their way to reach where they have reached. Uh, Having reached there, they feel hugely burdened by the role of being a leader.
Mm.
Uh, and in my observation, many of them have not made the transition from being great managers to becoming actually leaders. So they aren't able to let go of a lot of things that they used to do as a manager. And now, as a leader, one is not expected to do those things, but somewhere the recipe of past success becomes the recipe for future failure. Yeah.
Mm.
So how have you made a transition? And when you look back at your career, at what stage in your career and what kind of a role that you took on, actually you had to make that switch from being a manager to now a leader? And did that switch come naturally to you, or were there some experiences that forced you to make the switch? It would be great if you can share an example of your own career journey where you had to make that switch, which could help probably a lot of my coaches or my ex-coaches to listen to this and probably pick up a few nuggets from here.
So I think the big transition for me was when I became CEO of Philips Lighting for the Indian subcontinent. Now, I joined the organization in 2010 as the head of marketing and the head of the lamps business, which was about 50% of the overall business. And when I joined, there was a potential path. There were obviously multiple candidates when the CEO of Philips Lighting moved on to another role. Then, at the time of the interview itself, it was, this is a potential path for you if you do well in the organization. But within a year of my joining, the CEO of Philips Lighting moved on to become CEO of Philips India. And that role opened up. Now, I'd been there for just a year, and that's a fairly short period of time. So I put my hand up and said that I'd like to pitch for the role. Now, was I 100% ready for the role? I think self-evaluation, I was probably 90% ready, right? There was more to learn about the organization, about particularly the professional business, etc. So there were aspects of the business that I wasn't fully on top of. But I knew that I thought I could make the effort and therefore kind of do the role. So I put my hand up, and there was a rigorous process. I had interviews with business group heads, the CHRO, global CHRO, the global CEO, etc. And there were obviously other candidates internally as well. And I got the role. I think that transition, because till then I handled sales and marketing roles, some business head roles, but this was a proper CEO role. It was B2C and B2B, 3,000 crore business. I mean, it was a large business. So that, for me, was a big transition from being a manager to being a leader. But then you're leading thousands of people across the country kind of organization. And then you have to really step up. So I think at times like this, you need to be very, very self-critical to understand what you need to work on to become a better leader. So I spent a lot of time with my ex-boss, who luckily was still in the system, talked with other people around the world who are doing similar roles. I talked to my team members, because when you move from being a peer to becoming their leader, that also sometimes causes a little bit of dissonance, right? So you need to make sure that you're mature and you kind of take people along. So there were a lot of things that I had to do as a leader, which I hadn't done in the past. But making sure that you kind of look inwards and say, this is what I need to work on so that I become a better leader over the next few years, I think that's very, very important. So getting that stamp of a leader is great, but unless you work on yourself, you may end up failing. So the example that you took of people who kind of don't make that transition, get the role, but they're not able to deliver. So I think a large part of it is just making sure that you kind of work on yourself to say, okay, this is what I know I'm good at. These are the areas where I need to complement. So get in people who are better than you. I think that's a very, very important thing. And that's one thing I think in that same role that I was talking about, got in a few people who are doing very well in the organization. So I think never feel threatened by people that you either recruit or develop. I think as a leader, a lot of people get threatened that I'll lose my job if someone else starts kind of delivering really well. And I think you should be proud if someone takes over the job from you, from your team. And that's luckily something that over the last 15 years, a lot of roles that I've left, people I've recruited to the organization or developed internally have then taken my roles. And that gives you a lot of pride, I think. So don't feel threatened by your own team. Get people, and I'm proud to say that I've gotten people who are stronger than me, right? In certain ways, and they bring their own strengths. So everyone has their strengths and shortcomings, but get in people who are very, very strong. Don't get in people who are going to be yes men or yes women, right? So I think that's very, very important.
Great answer, Nirupam. Thanks. Last question, which is probably more of interest to me personally, is that have you ever had a professional coach who you worked with, either for a professional challenge that you were dealing with at work, or maybe to be a better version of yourself in the personal space as you may want? I mean, have you had a coach, and how that experience was if you did have one?
Yeah, so I did have a coach. So when I took over the CEO of Philips Lighting role in 2011, then Philips actually had a coach who was based out of Bombay. So I was based out of Gurgaon, and the coach was in Bombay. And the whole idea was to help me develop as a leader of a large organization. So I think the experience was very useful. because I think the role of the coach is to make you think about yourself and what you need to do. So it's not so much about what is the P&L and how do you run a P&L, etc. It's about you as a leader. What do you need to do now that you've got a larger team? What do you need to work on? How do you interact with people around the world? You've got multiple stakeholders. Uh, I think that experience was very useful and it came at the right time. I think it was kind of a progressive move that people who are moving into the CEO roles in the organization were appointed coaches. That came a kind of process. So I thought that was a good process, did help me a lot in the initial months of my taking over that role. So I see it as positive. Over a period of time, I have either mentored and coached a lot of people. And I think it's extremely rewarding. So, and you obviously know this extremely well doing it yourself, but I think there's so much that you learn from your coaches and mentees, right? And it's not one way. It's not the coach telling you what to do. I think sometimes in those conversations, there's a lot that I've learned. So what's called reverse mentoring as well, right? I think that's quite an important thing. Also things as you get older, you kind of may not be in touch with. So I think there's a lot that I learned from all my coaches and mentees. So I think it's a very, very useful process. Again, some companies do it well, other companies don't do it that well. I would say that it is something the company should focus on. Having solid, and making that distinction, coaching and mentoring, I think that's also important. But making sure that at the right time, particularly when people move from individual contributor to middle management, when they move from middle management to senior management, those are transition points. And you want people to succeed, right? You're not appointing them to, right? But not everyone can make it, then help them to make it. So I think coaching and mentoring is a strong role there. So I would strongly advise that it's something that should be institutionalized in organizations.
So one of the things that we also run something called an executive coaches forum, and a lot of coaches are a part of that forum. And oftentimes there are conversations amongst coaches wherein coaches face in the initial stage when organizations actually appoint coaches to work with leaders. Many coaches initially experience a little of resistance from leaders in the business as to why have I been given a coach. Somewhere the notion that is, or the impression that is cast is that there's something wrong with you as a leader, hence you need to get some external support of so and so person as a coach, and so on. So this is a kind of conversations that typically happens in these forums, and how do you overcome that, and how do you work and help leaders see value? In your experience, personal experience, when you were appointed a coach or offered a coach, what was your going in mindset? And when you as a leader offered coaches to some of your direct reports who may have shown potential, how did you set it? So it's a two-faced question. One is, how did you look at coaching when it was offered to you, and how did you position coaching when you offered it to some of your colleagues for their development?
So in my case, it was pitched as we want to help you succeed. Right? So I think it was pitched in absolutely the right way. But like I said, I knew that I was 90% ready, right? Anyone who thinks they're 110% ready for a role, I mean, sometimes that's kind of over-evaluating yourself. So in my case, I knew that there were some areas that I needed to work on, and I was very clear on that. And from the organization point of view, they got in someone who had the relevant experience in the areas that I wanted to really work on for myself. So it was a perfect fit as well. So I think if it's pitched in the right way, I took it very positively as saying that company is investing. It's an investment, right? You are investing.
Correct.
So I think that investment is a positive sign that the organization wants me to succeed. And coming to the second part, so when I pitch it for anyone in my team and say, here's what we plan for you, this is going to help you to really move further in your career. I think that's extremely important. And ideally, you should select coaches based on the conversation that you've had in terms of what that person wants to work on. What that person wants to work on, then have that discussion, and hopefully that person also kind of agrees that those are the areas that need development. Then you find a coach who will help you in those areas, right? it's very important to find the right fit of a coach and coachee as well.
Right.
I think what
Absolutely.
happens sometimes is that if the fit of the coach and coachee is also not right, then there's dissonance. Then you say that I wanted to work on XYZ and you give me a coach who's good at ABC. So, matlab, how is this helping me? So I think making sure that you also get the right fit and communicate that this is basically to help you improve and go further in your career. I think if you communicate that very clearly, then people take it very positively.
Great. Thanks so much, Nirupam. I think great conversation. Really enjoyed, listening and reflecting on a lot of things that you shared. Uh, Probably it was kind of a interesting tutorial for me in terms of picking up some nuggets from your experience. So thank you so much for your time.
Always a pleasure talking to you, Anand.